Hi, this is Ron Aiken, and today we're going to be doing a micro-teach from chapter 14 of our book, which is involving the CIRC 5-stage crisis model. The learning objective for today is going to be to understand the 5 stages of crisis modeled by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They are the ones who developed the Crisis and Emergency Risk Communication Manual, of which the 5-stage crisis model is a part. Our definition. The crisis and emergency risk communication is an integrated approach to communicating risk and crisis in public health contexts. Developed by the Centers for Disease Control, among CIRC's resources is a 5-phase model of crisis stages. Those are pre-crisis, initial event, maintenance, resolution, and evaluation. The 5 stages in depth, pre-crisis, basically, that's referred to by professionals as the 95-5 rule. So 95% of your time is going to be in the pre-crisis stage. 5% of your time as a communicator in an emergency situation is going to be the actual event. So pre-crisis is where you prepare all of your messaging for any potential outcomes to make sure that it resonates and it connects. It's where you're developing relationships with key partners to make sure that they're available when the time comes, and to test that messaging out and evaluate your plans on a regular basis to make sure you're ready for any contingency. So then the initial event stage is when the actual event happens, hurricane, derailment, disaster, what have you. In those messages that come in that initial phase, you want to make sure you're really correctly communicating the risk. You're expressing empathy. You're providing simple explanations. We talk about how it's important when you're writing to the public to use language at a 6th grade level. Well, in crisis communications, that goes down to the 3rd grade level. So it's really important to make sure that your messages in those circumstances are very easily understood and that they are clear, they're factual, they're honest, and they provide a call to action that people can follow. The maintenance period is an ongoing day after day after day situation until the conflict is resolved. That involves updating people on the risks and what the most recent developments are, describe the actions being taken and what actions they should take. And it's also important to be flexible during this period. If you need to reset something, rumor control, if you see something isn't working, you have to be able to revolve that and identify it on a daily basis to make sure you're maximizing your impact. So resolution stage is the end of the event, and that's when you're going to use that to educate the public about next steps. You're going to do a hot wash, which is basically a debriefing right after the event is over so that it's fresh in everybody's minds to talk about what went right, what went wrong, and steps for the future. And it's also a time where you want to gain support for any policies, resources, and research that you would need to handle a future event from lessons learned. Then finally, the evaluation period is a more formal capturing of lessons learned through after actions reports, and when you have the ability to improve those plans, strategies, and return to your pre-crisis planning state. So the research that I looked for was it's Catherine Lambrick's article. It's about tracking differentiation of risk, the impact of subject framing and communication from the CDC during COVID-19. Now, this was an interesting article because she looked at that initial phase of the actual event going from December 31st, 2019, the first cluster of cases, through March 11th of 2020, so a 70-day period, and evaluating the CDC's communication of risk during that time frame. So it tracked those responses. She analyzed the communication. Her conclusion was that the CDC downplayed the risks initially, leading to high-risk individuals continuing to participate in public life. She found that those who were in that category of high risk were not necessarily identified specifically in those communications, and instead it was talked about threats to the general public at large. And so not making those folks understand that this was going to be affecting them potentially early led to a downplaying of the risk that could have put more people in danger. So communicating risk accurately is in paramount importance. Overestimating the risk leads to undue alarm and a lack of trust when that doesn't materialize, and underestimating the risk puts the public in danger and can erode trust. So critiques and directions for future research in this field with the 5-stage model. It's important as you go to analyze those missteps that you may see stage by stage. Don't necessarily wait to the end. I mentioned being flexible. That's very important to make sure that you're constantly evaluating what's going right and wrong because so much is at stake during crisis situations. I would also suggest research that builds in more daily analysis and also understands the limitations of that 5-stage model. It's a good overall framework, but it doesn't necessarily give you really in-depth directions and steps for what to take inside of that that can allow you to understand its limitations and be able to reset if necessary, how to pivot unexpectedly if things change, like we call them an event within an event, and then if something needs to change completely, how to reset that and to operate in a framework of constant change. And I would also encourage future research into third-party evaluations of these different crises and how they were handled. It was a good chance to do the evaluation of the CDC's COVID response. I think we'll look forward to a lot more research coming about the COVID response, not just from the CDC, but also state and federal government entities for their messaging that I think will be very useful. Our discussion question is to pick one of the following crisis events and explain how you'd handle it, from planning to evaluation in the role described. So you would go stage by stage in this, describe 2 to 3 activities or actions that you would undertake for each to manage the crisis more effectively. Those are there. COVID-19, you're the state health agency. A train derailment as the railroad official spokesperson. Hurricane, you're the governor's PIO. CEO of your company is arrested for defrauding your clients and stealing millions. You're the company PIO. Or you're the police PIO, and the situation is a lone gunman barricaded in the house shooting at police. Police responded to serve a warrant in this scenario, and once they arrived, he barricaded himself, began shooting. You are there to communicate to the public the dangers. Those are the references used in this article. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you later. Goodbye.